religion, and other moral guidelines are what influence such acts to be deemed illegal in the first place, and it is along these fundamental lines that we think. We obey these laws not because they are legal, but because to do so simply makes sense. For morally ambiguous acts, I reiterate again that the fear of sanction will be enough to deter all but the most nihilistic and reckless lawbreakers. Thus, we clearly have incentives and intuitions to obey the law that are more prominent than this absolute obligation. In response to the slippery slope contention, although it's true that without an absolute obligation to obey, there will be more instances of disobedience and lawlessness, the extent of this anarchy is grossly overestimated. One way to say it is the slope is not as slippery as many may believe. Again, remember that all those wishing to act disobediently will be risking sanction and will have to take all of these things into account, in addition to a status of immorality, because these punitive and moral codes exist, free from this absolute obligation to obey. Our more fundamental defenses will prevent this anarchy, and our legal system will not shatter, just due to this absolute obligation to obey disappearing. And this also invalidates the police state argument, as there will be no need for such a police state, considering there's going to be no anarchy. Secondly, we must look at this situation with reference to the lesser of two evils doctrine. The slippery slope is just that. It's a theory. Does the possibility of some escalation and some lawlessness outweigh the certainty of perpetuated injustice and oppression? I think not. This tenuous risk of escalation is worth risking to change evil and unjust laws, and the risk of doing so is not going to undermine society at large, I assure you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to address the points mostly about civil disobedience. I completely understand where people come to think that minorities have a really tough time, minorities in oppressed groups have a really tough time getting their points through the legal system, that because they're minorities in oppressed groups. If not, they would not be. That, even that, when they do get their point through, and it has been done many times, through the legal system, it gives them a sense of legitimacy. It's harder to dispute their points when it has been done through all of the obstacles that have been put through them. And if they have subsisted, their point will be better cemented in society. Also, unjust laws are very open to interpretation. What is unjust to one person might not be unjust to another. So if everyone gets to decide what's just, what's not unjust, that's why we have judges and lawmakers. We have them there in place so they can take those decisions. That's why we elect them, or we put them in that position. And my point is not to follow the law blindly. I'm not stating that. You should never follow the law blindly. You should challenge it, but challenge it through the lawful channels that are given to us in society. Go to Congress, make a petition, peaceful legal rally, whatever, but do not give the government an excuse to abuse you by going outside the law. And I cannot stress enough my point that civil disobedience does not necessarily mean go and changing the world for good. Civil disobedience might have dark intentions in it. It's sometimes, and a lot of times, it has been, in some examples, very good, but in many other examples, it's very bad. So civil disobedience does not mean for the good of society or for the good as a whole, even if it's done peacefully. And what is fairness, same as unjust, is a very relative term as well. So that cannot be taken into account as a point for civil disobedience. And even if breaking the law in some instances is very beneficial for society, such as I said, Rosa Parks, most of the time it is not. Breaking the law creates a sense of anarchy. And even if our opposition says that we are abusing the word anarchy, and that like many times it's been broken, that there's not just chaos. Well, the problem with anarchy is that it creates a void of power, and those voids are filled up pretty quickly, but not always are those voids filled up by good people. So that's me.
In response to the points made by the proposition, I will specifically address several of the contentions established by Marcelo, which I prove to be unfounded. In my argument that the merits of civil disobedience show the non-existence of an absolute obligation to obey the law, I briefly outlined its main characteristics, elaboration on which will disclaim many of Marcello's assertions. I follow the commonly accepted interpretation of civil disobedience as defined by renowned philosopher John Rawls. The four characteristics consist of publicity, nonviolence, conscientiousness, and aim for change in a law or policy. To start, the example of Hitler, who broke the law to promote the interests of the Nazi Party, that was given can hardly be considered civil disobedience because it violates the condition of conscientiousness. By this, Rawls means sincerely acting in a way that addresses the sense of justice of the majority of the community and declaring that the principles of social cooperation among free and equal men are not being presented. This was clearly not the intention of Hitler, who fought for institutionalized inequality. Essentially, the point is, civil disobedience is not just breaking the law. For example, a more accurate portrayal of civil disobedience during this time would be the refusal of Jewish citizens to be taken to concentration camps, when such was ordered under the laws of the German government. In this case, the minority is addressing the sense of justice of the majority in protest of what they see as a blatant act of injustice in the law. Another misinterpretation I would like to address is that civil disobedience might lead to violence. First off, one of the fundamental aspects of civil disobedience is that it be non-violent. On this, I need not elaborate further. But secondly, Marcello suggests that even if the act of civil disobedience is peaceful, the response from the government may not be. So people should not protest unjust laws by breaking them, because if they do, the government may physically harm them. This is clearly not an argument disproving the merits of civil disobedience, but rather shows that the government may sometimes be both oppressive and unjust. In such a case, if the minority bears the risk of harm, the reasons for his actions still hold weight, and even more so because his sincerity is proven by the sacrifices made. This leads me to another point, which should certainly be addressed. Civil disobedience describes a time when breaking law is considered necessary and thus justified, but its current conception does not include exemption from penalty, part of the condition of publicity. When the disobedient performs the act, he's accepting whatever repercussion may result for the change he is advocating, exemplified by Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who accepted arrest and punishment and received it openly. This nullifies contentions that such acts would lead to a state of anarchy, which my partner Evan also invalidated, and is a point I believe my opponent overlooked in his argument. Lastly, on the point that laws developed as a result of awareness through civil disobedience lack legitimacy, this is quickly refuted when we think of voting laws today. Do we think the laws that all citizens above the age of 18 are allowed to vote, regardless of race, is any less justified or well-founded than other laws? No. On the contrary, the public and thoroughly contested nature of the resulting law, to some, lends support to its adoption. Therefore, I contend that based on the commonly accepted definition of civil disobedience, it continues to be an accurate example of why there may be legitimate reasons for breaking the law, and there does not exist an absolute obligation to obey the law. My opponent recommended legal channels, but the extreme lengthiness of the process is ineffective. He also, just to mention, suggested that people do peaceful legal rallies. This is a prime example of civil disobedience, so this just strengthens my claim. So that's my last point. Thank you very much.